Today, we're busting another myth about the Constitution, this time the Philadelphia Convention of 1787. Most people seem to believe that it was Congress that called for the convention under the Articles of Confederation. Even the Library of Congress, Wikipedia, and elsewhere, they all make this claim, but it's totally false. It was actually the Commonwealth of Virginia that initiated the call for the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. She was followed by a number of other states before Congress ever even shared their opinion on this in February 1787. So on this episode, I'm going to set the record straight. I've got plenty of receipts, but make sure to stick around to the end because I'm going to cite a pretty highly respected Federalist lawyer who was later a state Supreme Court justice who outright admitted that doing this was, quote, a direct violation of the Articles of Confederation. But there is an interesting caveat and twist to that. First of all, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the Path to Liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the Fast Friday edition of the show for July 19th, 2024. Let's kick it off with a little background info here from the Library of Virginia. They point out that in September of 1786, a convention of commissioners from several states met in Annapolis, Maryland, to address issues regarding commerce. It was called by Virginia in January of 1786, primarily James Madison, and it was primarily a trade issue between Virginia and Maryland, but more broadly than that as well. Commissioners were appointed in 9 states, but only 5 were there: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Virginia. So they adjourned pretty quickly. It was just 3 days later, September 14th, and they had Alexander Hamilton draft a report proposing a convention of all the states to revise the Articles. The resolution acknowledged some problems with the current system, proposed a remedy. And this is the report, the Annapolis Convention Resolution. It'll be linked to in the show notes. Alan Mosley will get that organized, and I'll have it published over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. We have a blog post for every episode published there. I'll get that up a couple of hours after this live stream is done. But here's a couple of quick excerpts from Hamilton's report or resolution. Your commissioners cannot forbear to indulge an expression of their earnest and unanimous wish that speedy measures be taken to effect a general meeting of the states in a future convention for the same and such other purposes as the situation of public affairs may be found to require. Now, of course, they were talking about regulating trade, but this is where they're kind of like trying to get some wiggle room here. The power of regulating trade is of such comprehensive extent and will enter so far into the general system of the federal government that to give it efficacy and to obviate questions and doubts concerning its precise nature and limits may require a correspondent adjustment of other parts of the federal system. So they're basically saying, well, we're going to do quite a bit here. One more from Hamilton's report. Your commissioners are of opinion that a convention of deputies from the different states for the special and sole purpose of entering into this investigation and digesting a plan for supplying such defects as may be discovered to exist will be entitled to a preference from considerations which will occur without being particularized. In other words, let's get this done. Now, the Library of Virginia points out that the delegates proposed a convention rather than a debate in Congress. The Virginia Act for appointing delegates makes the same case in November of 1786. I'll cover that in just a moment. But they thought that Congress was going to be too busy with their ordinary work and they wouldn't be able to give it proper attention. And if they did it in Congress, a lot of people who they wanted to be their delegates at the convention couldn't participate. So that's an interesting side note. But here's where the Library of Congress goes fully off the rails, literally starts making stuff up. They say the Annapolis report further suggested that Congress direct, this is false, but this quote comes from it, but it's not asking Congress to do this, the appointment of commissioners to meet at Philadelphia on the second Monday in May next, to take in consideration the situation, to devise such further provisions as shall appear to them necessary to render the Constitution of the federal government adequate to the exigencies of the Union. So they say the report then was passed, it was transmitted to Congress, and in February of 1787, it was the 21st, Congress, following these suggestions, called for a convention. So here's the mainstream view. Again, it's Library of Congress, Wikipedia, which we'll get to in a moment, basically all the big ones. They say that there was a convention which was partially attended in Annapolis in September of 1786. That's correct. Hamilton wrote a report saying there needed to be some major revisions. That's correct. And then, ignoring a bunch of stuff that happened between September 1786 and February 1787, as if nothing ever happened. They just sent it right to Congress. Congress called a convention. They did a convention under the Articles of Confederation, and that's the end of the story. But most of that is either just ignoring a bunch of other stuff or just making things up. I'm not sure which it is. But for here, back to Hamilton. They point out in this resolution of the Annapolis Convention that they're calling on the states to do things, the states that sent the commissioners there only. They weren't actually even sending it to the other states. They called for an exertion of the untied virtue and wisdom of all the members of the Confederacy. But your commissioners, with the most respectful deference, beg leave to suggest their unanimous conviction that it may essentially tend to advance the interests of the Union if the states, by whom they have been respectively delegated, would themselves concur and use their endeavors to procure the concurrence of the other states in the appointment of commissioners to meet in Philadelphia on the second Monday in May next. So they're basically saying, look, what we want to do, we're giving you a report of what we did here. We're sending it back to the states that these commissioners are from, and we're asking those states to reach out to the other states to get this convention going. And Rob Natelson, in an interesting post on this, says, in a nutshell, the Annapolis commissioners suggested to the 5 states that sent them that those states agree with what they want to do and promote the idea of a gathering in Philadelphia to consider the situation, to devise provisions to change the political system, to render it adequate to the exigencies of the Union, and obtain the agreement of Congress after they get it all done, and all the state legislatures. And Rob points out, and he's correct on this was not a call. It was just merely a suggestion. The commissioners at this convention had no legal power to call a convention, so they suggested that their own states take action. The resolution was never even directed to the other state. Now, certainly it was printed and spread around, but the resolution was sent specifically to the states that had commissioners there, those 5 states. John Dickinson took it back to the Confederation Congress as well, but the Confederation Congress did literally nothing with it for months and months and months. Now, here on November 23rd, 1786, the Virginia Senate, they concurred with the House. I think they passed it on the 9th, an act for appointing deputies to the 1787 Philadelphia Convention. I've got the image of this up on the screen. Now, I've seen it listed as both November 23rd and December 1st, depending on which source. I guess it depends on how it was recorded in a journal or something, but you can read it in full on your own. Here are some excerpts. Now, as noted before by the Library of Virginia, the act itself specifically said a convention was preferable to going to Congress. They said it seems preferable to a discussion of the subject in Congress, where it might be too much interrupted by the ordinary business before them, and where it would, besides, be deprived of the valuable counsels of sundry individual who are disqualified by the Constitution or laws of particular states, or restrained by particular circumstances, etc. In other words, we want to be able to include people who aren't in Congress to this convention. They point out that this crisis is arrived at which the good people of America are to decide the solemn question whether they will by wise and magnanimous efforts reap the just fruits of that independence which they have so gloriously acquired, and of that union which they have cemented with so much of their common blood. So they're saying, look, we want to have this convention. We're calling on the other states to have a really strong spirit to get this done. And here we're authorized, be therefore enacted by the General Assembly, that 7 commissioners be appointed, who or any 3 of them are hereby authorized as deputies from this Commonwealth to meet such deputies as may be appointed and authorized by other states, to assemble as above recommended, to join with them and do all the stuff that we're talking about previously here, to handle the exigencies of the Union, etc. And then the governor is requested to transmit forthwith a copy of this act to the United States and Congress and to the executives of each of the states in the Union. And I'll include this, or Alan will include this in the show notes, and I'll get it published over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty so you can read it in full. That's the Virginia Act, November 23rd, 1786. 1786. Now, after that, things happened pretty quickly. But first of all, I should point out that there's 4 points from that act that we can really glean pretty quickly. One, they reiterated the recommendation of the Annapolis Convention, the Annapolis Resolution calling for a convention and specifically bypassing Congress. They were trying to avoid Congress. They pointed out that there was a crisis at hand. That's number 2. Number 3, they urged the other states to have the same kind of spirit as when they joined the Union under the Articles of Confederation. And then they had the governor send it out to the other states. So it was really Virginia saying, let's get this done. Rob Nadelson points out that after that, events unfolded quickly. Pennsylvania announced participation next. That was December 30th. North Carolina and New Hampshire in January of 1788. Delaware on February 3rd, and Georgia on February 10th. So by the time Congress even passed anything on this, which was February 21st, 7 states, I guess I had the year wrong. So December 30th, 1786 for Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and New Hampshire in January of 1787, then Delaware, Georgia in February, and then February 21st, 1787. By that point, when Congress did pass a resolution, 7 states had already agreed to participate under terms granting the convention wide powers. Thus, he says, Virginia's act served as the call. It urged all states to act. It was then sent to the other states, and other states quickly responded. Now, some people claim that it was New Jersey that actually made the call. Not too many, because they passed a resolution on November 24th, a day after Virginia in 1786. But as you can see from the text here, it'll be linked to in the show notes so you can read it in full. It's just one long paragraph. Commissioners are empowered and authorized to meet, to take in consideration things, the adequate exigencies like the resolution from Annapolis, etc. This wasn't directed to any other state. It wasn't sent to any other state. It didn't call for a convention. It just says we're authorized to participate should other states decide to do this. Whereas Virginia specifically said, hey, let's use that spirit that joined us as a union and get together in Philadelphia. Now, what about this act of Congress? Because everyone keeps citing, or at least all these mainstream people saying Congress specifically called a convention. Well, here's Wikipedia. On February 21st, 1787, the Confederation Congress called a convention of state delegates in Philadelphia to propose revisions to the Articles. This is a false claim. It did not happen. Now, the Confederation Congress did pass something on February 21st, 1787. I have the text of it right here. You can see it on the screen. I'll link to it in the show notes. You can read the whole thing. You can read what was rejected and what they passed. And here's what they passed. Resolved that in the opinion of Congress, it is expedient that on the second Monday in May, a convention of delegates who shall have been appointed by the several states be held in Philadelphia for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation and reporting to Congress and the several legislatures such alterations and provisions therein as shall, when agreed to in Congress and confirmed by the states, render the federal government, the federal constitution, adequate to the exigencies of government and the preservation of the Union. So, I mean, on its face, you might think, oh, okay, Congress is saying do this thing in Philadelphia in May and revise the Articles of Confederation. But we have to keep in mind that, first of all, Rob points out that this was actually a compromise because there was a committee in the Confederation Congress that said they wanted to strongly recommend a convention with very broad powers. And New York had a proposal that Congress just recommend a convention limited to proposing amendments. What they ended up with was this kind of mishmash of just saying, hey, we got to deal with the exigencies of the Union, which sounds like broad powers, but they didn't even recommend it. They took out all the recommendation. And he says, Rob says, note that the congressional resolution was not a summons, nor even a recommendation. It wasn't even at that level. It expressed only the opinion of Congress, language that holds no legal force. And here it is, resolved in the opinion of Congress. It is expedient. So it's just, all they're saying is they passed a non-binding resolution that the Congress had an opinion that it would be a good idea to have a convention to revise the Articles of Confederation. No one was required to follow what they were saying. And so Rob sums it up with Virginia, therefore, called the Constitutional Convention. And the members of the convention certainly understood this as well. Right near the beginning, in May 29th, when they finally started getting things rolling, they kicked it off. Of course, one of the first things that happened was this thing called the Virginia Plan. This was a proposal for a huge centralized government from James Madison and Edmund Randolph and others. But if you think about it, if Virginia was the one who called the convention, everyone's probably saying, hey, you guys did this. What do you want to do? Give us your proposal. And that's basically how it went down. Here from Madison's notes of the Philadelphia Convention, May 29, 1787, Mr. Randolph opened the main business. He expressed his regret that it should fall to him, he was the governor, rather than those who were of longer standing in life and political experience to open the great subject of their mission. But as the convention had originated from Virginia, and his colleagues supposed that some proposition was expected from them, they had imposed this task on him. So Virginia was saying, we want to have a convention. They did in Annapolis. They didn't have any legal authority to change things. So then Virginia made another call to have another convention, and then everyone started showing up. And so everyone said, well, since it started in Virginia, you guys get things rolling here, Governor Randolph, and that's exactly how it played out. Now, I mentioned at the beginning this highly respected Federalist lawyer, a guy named Hugh H. Brackenridge, not the Breckenridges that you may have heard of, but he published an essay. He was a highly respected lawyer on the Federalist side in Pennsylvania. He later served on the state Supreme Court, so this is a top legal mind of the time. He published this essay in the Pittsburgh Gazette, October 27, 1787, discussing this. He said the calling of the late convention did not originate with Congress. It began with the state of Virginia, which was followed by this state. Pennsylvania was number 2, without any hint of the necessity of this measure from Congress whatever. It was a proceeding altogether out of the Confederation and with which Congress had nothing to do. And now this is really the interesting part because first of all, he explains why they decided to go this route. And then he says, yeah, man, we violated the Articles of Confederation doing this. But check it out. He said the refusal of Rhode Island to confirm that alteration of the Articles of Confederation, which gave to Congress the right of imposing 5% on all imports. So this is one of many times where they tried to expand congressional power, but failed. And the big reason was primarily you had to get everyone to agree. And maybe that makes sense. Maybe that's a better approach than what they ended up with. But this was their explanation. So it had shown the necessity of departing from the Articles, which rendered it necessary that 13 states should agree in any alteration, and had given rise to the calling the convention. But check this admission out. He said it was a direct violation of the Articles of Confederation and in the face of them. And therefore, it was improper to consult Congress about it. Hey, we're getting rid of you is what we've decided to do. These sovereign states that have decided to join in a union for very limited delegated purposes under this Articles of Confederation. We're deciding that we might just get rid of you. We're doing this without you, whether you like it or not. It would be improper to consult with you. He said, therefore, it was improper to consult Congress about it, that they ought not to seem to know anything of it until the new system was organized and the dissolution of the old one pronounced. So he's saying, look, we just decided to do this. We knew it went beyond the Articles of Confederation, but it's our right to do that. He said this was recurring to the great source of all authority, the people, and taking up the thing wholly on new ground. Now, that kind of sentiment might sound familiar to those of you who've read things like the Declaration of Independence, which says that it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. And when you alter or abolish a system, you generally don't get approval of the system that you're part of. And so therefore, the only way to do that is by violating that system. So that was the Federalist take, was that they were violating the Articles of Confederation. They had every right to do so because the people themselves are the source of all power. And if the people don't approve of it in the ratification debates, then they've done nothing. All they did was propose a new system. Well, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. I hope you learned something new. That's more important than anything. I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me today. If you want to help us reach and teach more and more people with this essential, foundational, historical information, there is absolutely nothing that helps us roll up our sleeves more every single day, more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. If you got a couple of bucks of that dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way. I'd be very grateful for your support. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. I really appreciate you joining me here today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Hope you have an awesome weekend, and hope to see you next week here on the path to liberty.